The format this morning is going to be, we'll watch a video that they have done, and then we'll have some question and answer afterwards. So can we all say hi, very, very Canadian friendly hi to James and Jennifer?
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Hello.
So we have known the Becknells, wow. We've known them for a lot longer, but we moved to Chicago 20 years ago. That is just hard to even believe. And they're so on two fronts, so much has happened since, and 20 years seems to have flown by. So there's a dual thing there, but it is just so fantastic to have them and have them share their expertise. They serve in the ministry there in Chicago, and we look forward to. Say again? Did someone say something? Okay, but we're just really thrilled.
So how today's going to work, and after we do our little thing here, we'll give the Becknells just an opportunity to introduce themselves and their family. We're going to watch a video. This is teaching that they did for another church, and we just edited a little bit, but we'll watch the video of their teaching, and then we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions afterwards. Just a couple things, if everyone could go ahead and mute themselves, that would be really awesome, so that this actually is being live streamed. So if there are people that can't join the Zoom, they will have an opportunity as well to ask questions. If you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and Tony and I will moderate the questions and ask the Becknells for that. So again, as Tony said, we're so grateful for them taking their time out and their expertise. This for Jen, this is specifically an expertise for her dealing with conflict in every area, but really, she's going to be speaking a lot today on conflict within the family and how to deal with that. But both James and Jen have just a wealth of experience, not just in ministry. James has his master's, I think it's in divinity. Yes. But, not just only in biblical teaching, but also here, and really understanding conflict and then helping us. I think it's one of those lessons, because I've already listened to it, that's not just applicable to the family, but it's really applicable to any relationship that you have when you're dealing with conflict. And I think if you're anything like me, I didn't grow up learning how to deal with conflict. I didn't develop the tools. And so some of this stuff is just really helpful to not just have a biblical foundation, but then also, I believe, just to have the necessary tools to understand it and then to work through it. So before we go ahead and start the video, I just want to open up the floor to John and James. Again, just saying thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning, to share, some of the things that you've learned through not only your education, but also just your personal experience. We do love the Becknell family, and Jen and I have many, many funny experiences that she's not allowed to share, because if she shares them, then I have to share things about watermelon and stuff like that. But we've had some very fun experiences together, and love them so much. And again, are grateful that they're here this morning. So.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for having us. Again, I'm James. This is Jennifer. We have two young women who we've parented. One is 21, and the other one is going to be 23 this year. Our oldest is in Boston. She's a nurse. She was married this past October, and so she's a newlywed in a one-bedroom apartment with a 110-pound dog in Boston, right? Yeah. And so she's doing very well. Our youngest is an engineering student at Milwaukee School of Engineering. She is doing very well right now. She's got an internship. She's a rising senior in college. Behind us is Bailey. Can't miss Bailey. She's going to be in every frame. This is our new baby, our perpetual baby. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to this opportunity to share. Yes, we have, in 20 years, there are many things we could share about Tony and Melanie. So many fun memories and so many adventures. We've been through a lot together over the years. And so it's wonderful, wonderful memories that we have with them. But we look forward to sharing this video with you and having a chance to connect. So.
Yeah, thanks so much for allowing us to be here and share the things that we've learned, specifically just kind of the basics of conflict management and resolution. I know many years ago, I went to a class, for those of you who know Steve Staten, we got our master's at the same school, Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. And they had a friends and family weekend where you could go and kind of audit a class. And just this basic class, I was a kind of a light bulb went on for me, like, okay, so that's a part of what I've been doing in the ministry. I just did not have the tools or the language to actually define what I was doing. And so it just helped for me to have that backdrop, that kind of foundational understanding that I could build upon. And it served me well in the ministry. I've also been able to do some specific teaching and consulting and with different, churches and some secular organizations. So, I think these basics are, like Melanie said, many of us don't grow up with them. We don't really even know how to view conflict or deal with conflict. It's something oftentimes that we want to run from. And so hopefully this class will be helpful for you in the way that it's been helpful for us in our own personal relationships, but also just, helping other people. So there you go. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Our class is resolving family conflict. And in the spirit of our class tonight, we want to share a verse with you from Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. It says in Philippians 2:1, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one of mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, consider others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And this is a good thematic beginning point for us to consider the tools and the framework with which we are going to be able to resolve conflict. Conflict is a normal part of life. I don't know how you all feel about conflict. You'll learn how I feel about conflict tonight. Here's a little spoiler. I don't like it. But conflict is something that's a normal part of life. The presence of conflict should not be the measuring stick of communication in a family. Instead, we have to look to how well we are able to navigate the conflict and then the ultimate outcomes of your resolution process. And so it's not just about simply avoiding the thing you think is bad. It's about how you're able to navigate it and ultimately the outcomes of your process. Today, we're going to offer some discussion and practice in two areas. The two areas are framing, how to interpret and understand the conflicts in your family. And it's going to help you know what to focus on, focus your energy on, and what to focus your attention on. Mm-hmm. You know, when you're in the midst of conflict or challenge, sometimes you are disoriented, so you don't know where to focus your energy or your attention. And this framing will help us to be able to do that. We also want to offer you some tools of engagement. This is to increase awareness of the options available to you in resolving conflict, and also to give you skills and confidence in order to model healthy engagement processes. And this will also allow you to have increased competency, and it will lead to better outcomes. I think that's what we all hope for, is just we would like to have better outcomes when, and you know, inevitably we have those conflicts. So.
All right, so let's jump in. So for those of you who have a pen and paper, well, I'd like for you, even if you don't have a pen and paper, to grab one, because we're going to come back to this throughout this lesson. But I'd like for you to start by writing down one of two things: either the most recent conflict that has taken place in your household, in your family, or a recurring conflict that has been presenting itself time and time again over the last year. So just take a minute to jot that down. You don't have to go into detail right now. And we will come back to that in just a bit. So let me give you a second to do that.
Need interlude music.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, with doing teaching in conflict and doing a little bit of consulting, you know, one of the things that I hear a lot, and what I personally experienced before I learned about a conflict resolution, is that when we're in the midst of a conflict with another person, it's hard to make heads or tails of it. It's hard to make sense of what is actually happening. And so, you know, emotions can run high, and what it does is it just clouds our understanding. I often liken it to being like this big ball of yarn, and we just can't even unravel the pieces. So it's important or helpful to have a framework with which to identify the components of your conflict, to interpret their meaning, and then point you in the right directions moving forward. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. Basically, how most conflicts can simplistically be represented or framed is you start out with an issue or a problem, and you have the two parties. We're going to simplify it and make it a two-party issue. So, you know, husband and wife, parents and mom and kid, whatever. It's the parties involved. They have an issue, they have a problem. And then those two parties, each party takes a position relative to that issue. So that is a basic frame for conflict. And, you know, basically what happens when you have that issue and people take positions is each person is trying to engage in behaviors to win the other side over to their position. So it's in some respects a tug of wills. And this scenario can be resolved quickly, it can de-escalate, or it can escalate, but the basic framework remains the same. You have the issue, you have the parties that take positions on that issue, and they try to win the other person over to their side, so to speak. Let's go ahead and go to the next. Okay, so here, you know, we're talking about family conflict. So I'm just going to kind of give a scenario that I talked to somebody about earlier this week. And we're going to say Paula and Edgar are, they are a daughter and a father, and they're in a conflict over the amount of time being spent on the phone. Paula's the daughter. Not only the amount of time that she spends on the phone, but the transparency that her dad wants to have full access to her texts and, you know, the sites that she's navigating. And Paula is not feeling it. She is really not liking that. And so the issue is, how much transparency should there be regarding this phone use? And Paula's taken a position. She doesn't feel like there needs to be, maybe 50% transparency. The dad he wants to basically have carte blanche to all of in terms of access to her phone. So that's just kind of a made up scenario based upon a conversation that I had. But we'll be revisiting that as we go through. But I'd like to go ahead and give you a practical.
Yep. So if anybody out there is named Paula and Edgar, we are not singling you out.
No.
Yeah, and you know, just as a note, you know, obviously this is Jennifer's area of practice and specialization. So you're probably going to hear more from her than you will be from me tonight, which is in my mind, that's a really good thing. But one practical, a practical to consider, if we refer back to those conflicts that we wrote down earlier, that Jennifer referred to, the two conflicts, possibly a recurring conflict or the latest conflict that you've just had, we want to refer back to those at this point, and want to just give you some time to consider and fill in the issue and positions part of the framework that we just gave you. So if you consider the conflict, try to break it down into the issue and the positions. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, that's fine. And, you know, you don't have to go into too much detail, but again, we just want a general framework. We're trying to help you learn how to build this framework out so that you can dissect and understand the conflicts that are happening in your own families. So just kind of jot that down. Who are the people involved? What was the issue? And what were the general positions that they took regarding that issue?
Right.
Okay, so I'd like to share a personal example of a recurring conflict. This was an issue that kind of presented itself throughout the rearing of our children. And it was James and I coming from completely different vantage points with regard to dealing with the bad attitudes that our children might have about it, about something. And so here's an example of a conflict that we had.
So when our kids were younger, we decided we wanted to take them to Six Flags and go for a fun day of roller coasters and enjoyment. Well, this is early on when our kids were relatively young, and we didn't discover until it was too late that our kids, they didn't really like roller coasters. So Six Flags is not that much fun when you don't love roller coasters. So our kids, we're walking around Six Flags, and we're asking them if they want to go on rides. They're saying, no, we don't want to go on the ride. They're being grumpy and having bad attitudes, and they're just not happy. And you know, if you're anything like us as parents, we basically, Six Flags was a treat. We were kind of trying to spoil our kids and have a good time. And we're at Six Flags, and these kids are having bad attitudes. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't make the parents feel all warm and fuzzy on the inside, right? And that made Jennifer especially feel a certain way. I don't know if you want to share how that made you feel.
So my position on that issue was, we need to have a little talk. We need to have a discipling time with these kids. We need to pull them aside and deal with the ingratitude that was welling from within. I was really angry, but my position was, this needs to be dealt with.
Yeah,
what was yours?
Yeah. We're spending too much money. This needs to be good right now.
Right.
This is fun. Okay, we are gonna have fun. And so the tension and the heat is rising. And so I say, you know what? I'll be right back. And so I left them sitting on a bench, stewing and sweating in the hot summer sun. And they were sitting there, and I said, I'll be right back. I left, and in a few minutes I came back with a gigantic plate of funnel cake. So my answer to the conflict was, eat funnel cake. And Jennifer gave me a look of all the centuries because she wanted a discipling time and I came back with a funnel cake. And so, yeah, she wasn't exactly fired up with my choice in terms of how to solve the conflict, but
yeah, but I think so. James's position, on that was we just need to give them sugar and have fun and not really deal with the issue at hand.
right.
So,
But the final result is it kind of worked. Like they did get happy really quickly. So anyway,
yeah. So that's a personal example that, I'm giving you that personal example. We are just to help you to understand how to frame conflict. So you've got this issue, you've got the parties involved, and they fall on different sides of that conflict and they take positions. And, a lot of times there's a contest of wills. In this situation, we didn't really go back and forth. James brought the funnel cake. I was angry about the funnel cake, but the kids' attitudes did change, so I couldn't deny that. But so anyway, let's move on. Okay, so we've got this basic framework, the issue, the parties, and the positions. But the question that really you got to ask is, what is driving the conflict? And it's not the issues, actually. It seems obvious that it would be the issue, but it's not. What's driving that conflict is what lies underneath the issues. And so basically what conflict takes place when our interests, values, or core concerns are experienced as being under threat from another party. And so values basically are defined as guiding principles that determine how we live, how we determine right from wrong, good from bad. Interests can be defined as our wants, needs, desires as it relates to that particular issue. And so the issue is really basically the vehicle through which our values or interests clash. And, conflicts take hold when we start making attempts to defend against the threats that we're experiencing. So you can have a conflict like James and I did at Six Flags, but the conflict takes hold and escalates when we start engaging in attempts to defend those values or interests that we feel like are under attack. And I just want to say that the threat, a lot of times it doesn't even have to be real. It can just be the perception of a threat. And we can engage in these defensive behaviors. And that's when a conflict will escalate into it takes hold and escalates into like a fight. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I want you to think about an iceberg. Got this big iceberg here. And if you think about, when you see an iceberg, basically you're just seeing the tip of that huge mass of ice. And, it's only a fraction of its entire mass. And if you just paid attention to what was above the surface, you're only getting a partial glimpse of the whole thing. And so in conflict terms, the tip of that iceberg would be the issues and the positions that people take. Okay, but it doesn't give you the full story. Now, what's underneath is really the largest part of that iceberg mass. And, I would say probably 90% of the iceberg is actually below the surface. And so in terms of conflict, our conflict frame, really the inner workings of your conflict are below the surface. They're beneath the they're beneath the issues and the positions we take in relation to those. And what really drives our conflict are those interests and values. And really the positions that we take, let's go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. The positions that we take are our attempt, go ahead to the next one, are our attempt to, thanks. It's our attempt to actually meet these values and these interests. So let's go ahead and, are you going to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So if we go back to your conflict, and you write down some of like the recurring conflict or the conflict that happened this last week, and you write down some of the strong negative feelings that you or your family members experienced, that can help you to see some of these flashpoints that Jennifer's talking about. So whatever you wrote down is proof that some underlying interests or values have been ignored, disrespected, or challenged, threatened by the person you're in conflict with. You know, we don't encounter our values and interests. We feel them, right? They come from that feeling location. We don't focus on the values and interests that have been pricked. So if we want to think about those conflicts in different terms than just the issues and positions, we want to start to consider our feelings. And that will help alert us to some of these deeper issues that are at work. So we want to go back to what you wrote down and consider what those feelings were during those conflicts.
Yeah. And so I think the reason that this is important is because when you try to solve a conflict from a positional standpoint, there are very limited options that are solution sets that are available to you. You know, each person is trying to get the other person to their side. And, you know, if you look at it like a fixed pie, there's only so many pieces to go around. But if you can go below the surface and get to the interests that are driving us to take those positions, then it opens it up. There's a number of different potential options or solution sets that you can discover. And so there's not just position A and position B. Maybe there's 15 different ways to actually meet those underlying values and interests. And oftentimes the parties who can go below that surface and really deal with the interests that are underlying their conflicts, they're much more satisfied with the solutions. There's not this win-lose framework. It's a win-win. Hey, we can work together to discover how to answer these issues. So let's refer back to Paula and Edgar, the phone issue. Again, like I said, Paula took a position. She's wanting very limited access to her phone, and the dad is saying, well, I want total access. So those are the two positions, and they're fighting back and forth, and they're trying to land on something that's going to be agreeable to both. But if they can go below the surface and get into that iceberg, what they might discover are some interesting things. Like, for instance, Edgar, the father, maybe some things that are really important to him, values or interests related to this issue, are setting healthy boundaries for his daughter. As a parent, wanting control, the need to protect his children, safety for his children, the desire for transparency, and the desire to be able, to trust. So those are maybe some of those are things. I mean, again, this is a hypothetical, but I think as a parent reflecting back on a similar scenario, these were things related to that issue that were very important. Those were interests that were important to me as a parent. Now, regarding the teen, they have a whole host of other interests. Maybe there's their connection. For them, that phone is a way for them to be connected to their friends. Connection is really important to teens. Autonomy. As kids grow up, they want more and more autonomy. They want the freedom over the decisions that they make. Privacy, fun, affiliation, exploration, and freedom. Those are many of the things that I know are important to teens. And so if you think about, wow, these are the interests that each person has, what you will find when you start exploring those interests is that you will share interests that in common with the other person, but you'll also have differing interests. But if you can really uncover and unveil and explore those, what you'll find is, man, there's a lot of different solutions that are available that can meet those interests, that go beyond the positions that people originally cling to. So I don't know if you have anything you wanted to, I'll do this practical.
Okay.
So regarding the conflict that you wrote down, I want you to just think, can you immediately identify any of the underlying interests or values of the parties? If you can, then fill that framework in. The thing about interests is positions and issues are very easy to see, but underlying values and interests are oftentimes not as apparent. And so it takes practice and it takes practice to actually be able to identify them. And so we're going to talk more a little bit later about some practicals that you can do to actually reveal those.
Yeah. Can I just say something? I was going to say, and for some, it may be harder even than for others. Like I would say for myself, I am notoriously bad at knowing what I'm feeling. And so I have a lockbox on my feelings a lot of times. So the things that are within that values and interest realm a lot of times seem almost mysterious to me. Like I'll have presenting emotions in my body language, in my disposition that Jennifer will notice, and she'll be like, "Are you okay?" And I'll be like, "I'm fine." So so again, the work that will be required to get below the iceberg, sometimes it can be quite challenging, but worthy of doing.
And I think some things, some kind of hints that are helpful to guide you if it's something that's difficult to identify is, number one, use your feelings, those negative feelings that are emerging, as an anchor of sorts. Like recognize those feelings, and then you can kind of look at that and go, okay, well, what am I upset about? And that will give you an indication as to maybe what that value is that has been pricked or disrespected, that kind of thing. And then I think the other thing is just, take a piece of paper out and jot down, what is it that I want? What is it that related to this issue? What is it that I want? Why did I take this position? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish by taking this position? And that will start to give you some indication as to, well, what are my interests? What are my values as it relates to this particular problem? So let's keep going. We're going to move into some tools of engagement. We've started talking a little bit about some, but I think that the first one is this notion of being curious. And this is kind of a new thing that I've added into, my conflict classes. But what I have found is that curiosity is probably hands down one of the most important aspects of developing your communication and your conflict resolution skills. Because oftentimes we can come into our conflicts triggered, absolutely certain of what we know and ready to defend our positions, right? And I think embracing curiosity skills can move you away from that mode of engagement. There's an incredible book I would recommend highly. It's called The Power of Curiosity. Great book that really gives some insights into what it means to be curious and how to develop those skills in much more detail than what we're going to talk about today. It's by Kathy Taubiner and Kristen Siggins. So we'll put that in the notes. Okay, so what is curiosity? Curiosity is defined as the desire to learn, to know, or understand. And it's really interesting because it is the hallmark of children. Child psychologist Piaget basically said that it is through curiosity and play that kids orient themselves in the world, and they make sense of relationships and how their place in the world. It's through curiosity. And it's interesting too that Jesus calls us to be like little children, right? He says it's the children who are going to enter the kingdom first. And obviously there's a lot of different qualities that he was pointing to, but I do believe absolutely that curiosity is a big part of why we are called to be like little children. We are born curious. And unfortunately, as we grow up, oftentimes we lose that curious spirit. And so, this is hopefully a way for us to return to it and to see its value. just biblical examples that you can jot down and read later of curiosity, people exhibiting curiosity, are Nicodemus in John chapter 3, verses 1 through 16, and the rich young ruler in Matthew 19, verses 16 through 22. And so basically, what drives curiosity is uncertainty. It is basically a gap in information. And the thing about this information gap is that it has to be large enough that we are motivated to seek the information that we are lacking. If studies show that if the gap is too small, then we'll just kind of roll back into certainty about what we know, and we won't seek that information. So an information gap is essentially what drives curiosity. You think about people like Albert Einstein and Madame Curie, who made incredible scientific discoveries. And it was just a burning curiosity inside of them that led them to continue to search for the truth and for the information that that allowed them to make the discoveries, the theory of relativity. And for Madame Curie, she discovered radium and basically radioactivity. Einstein said that he had no special talent, but was only passionately curious. So it's very, very powerful quality to basically have. And so why is this important in conflict resolution? Well, I think the big thing is that curiosity, basically, we live in a culture and in a society that tends to value knowing and telling. It is actually overvalued. We look to experts to give us the deposit of information. It is valued to have the information. And, it's not a bad thing. We seek expert advice for their information, but because it's so highly valued in our society, we tend to take this paradigm into almost every area of our life. This desire to tell people what we know, to be the first to tell. Even at parties, it's like the person who has the greatest stories. It's all about telling people what we know. And as a result, we're underdeveloped in the area and in the skill set of inquiry and curiosity, asking questions, and even focusing on information that we don't know. Honestly, and that curiosity, we are oftentimes very we don't have self-awareness because we're not curious. We're not taught to really reflect, to introspect, to ask ourselves questions. And we are not good at asking curious, open questions to other people. We focus more on what we do know instead of what we do not. In conflict resolution, curiosity opens us up to new information that is often ignored in conflicts. And that has a lot to do with the physiological effect of fight or flight. Our brains start shutting down when we're in conflict, and it's difficult to think critically. And so curiosity basically rolls that fight or flight response back, and it helps us to integrate and be open to information that we would otherwise ignore. A great example, have you ever been in a conflict and you literally would have bet limbs that you were right? I know I have. Like, I'd almost bet a finger. I know I'm right. And then you cool off, and then you get information later and you're like, oh, I was wrong. That's an example. So curiosity can help you be open to and actually integrate that information that you might otherwise have missed. That having that information allows us to gain different perspectives and insights that can change the way that you move forward in a conflict. It also helps parties to overcome error and bias, which is just rampant in most conflicts because of that fight or flight response. And I think this, as parents, is really important too, is that curiosity levels the playing field. And as parents, a lot of times we, no, not willingly, but inadvertently, we can talk down to our kids, and we can assume that we know more than they do. And we don't necessarily ask them or inquire what they're feeling or what they're thinking. I know that was something I was guilty of a lot in my parenting of my kids when they were young. And so curiosity and having to humbly inquire of a person, it basically levels the playing field in terms of status. If I have to ask, if you have information that I need, then I have to humble myself to ask it of you. And so it really is a powerful tool in our parenting to engage our children and to kind of, basically topple that top-down structure that often results when we're talking to our kids. Can you go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the last thing is, when we aren't curious, we don't learn. And when we don't, when we're not curious, we don't listen, and we resort to kind of default patterns of judging, blaming, and shaming. So through curiosity, the goal really is to help us to adapt a new paradigm of communication. Next slide. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, great. Which involves listening and understanding and making new connections. Mm. Okay. All right. Did you want to add anything or share anything so far?
I think I'm good.
Okay. So let's talk about these curiosity skills. Like what are they? Well, there's basically three. The first one is, and these curiosity skills are meant to be applied personally or introspectively, and also to other people, to the people you're in conflict with, your family members. But it starts with being present. It starts with a mindset of like, how am I going to enter into these communications with people? I have got to be present. We live in an age of total distraction, right? Where you got the phone and you got the computer, and there's just stuff going on all the time. And so being present in the here and now, not in the past, not in the future, but right here. That's super important. Just how you enter in the space, where your mind's at. Secondly, your body language. We communicate like 7% of our communication are words. The other 93% is body language. So paying attention to that. And then this last thing, which in the book of Curiosity, it's called the gremlin voice, which is the inside voice of judgment. We have to really mind that when we are developing our curiosity skills, because it's very active. That's what I found in my own life, is that judgment voice is constantly talking. You have to quiet it down so that you can actually engage in curious inquiry. So let's, okay, so the first thing is you've got to choose how you listen. There's basically 5 listening choices that have been identified in this book. The first one is just not to listen at all. So that's an option. Choices 2 and 3 are not curious modes of listening. The first one is focusing on me. And basically what that means is that as a listener, I'm listening to another person talk, and I'm stepping into their shoes and judging them based on what I would do. So they're talking and I'm like, well, what I would do if I were you is da 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 da. So the gremlin voice is just talking, and you're not really receiving what that person is saying. You're judging them in your head. So that's listening, focusing on me. Another non-curious way of listening is focusing on you. So in that same situation as the listener, I'm listening to what you're saying, but in my head, my gremlin voice is saying, well, what you need to do is this. So again, there's judgment. You're not really open to what the person is sharing. It's not all bad. Sometimes experts or friends they listen in voices, choice 2 and 3. But for us in our conflicts, that's really not the most productive way to listen. there's two other choices which do promote curiosity. And that's choice 4, which is where you focus on understanding. And so in that choice, you're basically you're exhibiting active listening. You are open to the answer. You don't have preconceived notions about what they are going to say, what the answer is. There's no judgment, because true curiosity holds no judgment. And you don't have a stake in the outcome of the conversation. So in an example of listening choice 4, you're in a nursing home with your grandma, and she's just talking about her life and telling you about her experiences, and you're just taking it all in. You're taking it all in. You're not really paying attention to time. You have no control over the outcome of the conversation. That's listening choice number 4. You're just focusing on understanding. Now, in conflict, you do have some kind of, you care about the outcome of the conversation and the direction of the conversation. So probably the most appropriate would be listening choice 5, which is focusing on us. And so in this choice, again, there's active listening. You're curious. You're interested in what the person is saying. You're not exhibiting judgment. The gremlin voices are quiet. You're quieting them down, but you're still remaining invested in the outcome of what is being talked about. So if I can just share personally, when I read this book and I was reading about curiosity, I was like, you know what? I really want to take a look at my own personal listening choices, because I've been in the ministry. I'm probably pretty good at this. It was so humbling. I mean, even I went in the kitchen and started talking to James, and he was talking, and the gremlin voice was like, well, what you need to do, well, what I would do. I mean, it was so loud. And I just was like, wow, if I'm doing this in a non-conflict situation, I know that I'm doing this. I am judging. I'm coming in. I am not listening curiously in conflicts at all. I've already got preconceived notions about what the person is going to say and thoughts about what they're saying. And so this is definitely something I would encourage you to practice even when you're not in conflict, just so you can get an idea of like how you listen and learn how to drop into choices 4 and 5. It does take training. It does take concentration to do. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I've discovered, as Jennifer's been learning about curiosity, when your wife starts to learn something new, you start learning something new as well. And one of the things that I've noticed in our conversations as we've been talking and reflecting on this material is that I am a teller. And that means I know something and I'm going to tell you what I know. And so I think for me, it's been a real wake-up call, I guess, as a person who is involved in acquiring knowledge and sharing knowledge with people as a teacher. It's very much kind of in line with my professional goals and my professional life in one regard. But that mode doesn't work all the time in relationships. So I found myself in conversations with Jennifer and with others like, oh, I'm doing it right now. I'm regurgitating information that I know and trying to hold back. But what I found, just like Jennifer said with the gremlin voice, I find it to be very hard. I just slip so easily right into it. And Jennifer asked me if I was going to share about repenting of that, and I said no, I'm not there right now. So if you could all pray for me, that would be great.
Oh, That's great. That's great. So, but if you've ever been in a situation where somebody is telling you something you already know, how do you feel about that? I mean, sometimes it can be slight annoyance, but I know other times people will tune out. If you almost have to I think what I feel sometimes is, do you think I'm dumb? Like, I know that.
Someone, she's talking about someone. Guys, see how this works?
But, with my kids, when they get the glazed look, because you're just preaching at them, talking at them. this is the kind of thing that rolling back and just going, okay, there's a time to tell what you know. There's a time as parents to talk about that, but we really need to increase our skills with humble inquiry, with listening well. And that's the second part, is learn how to ask curious questions, because the way you listen determines the kinds of questions that you're going to ask. And so when you're in this conflict and you're trying to, figure out, where do I go? Well, a big part of that is let's get into asking curious questions. Now, what are curious questions? Curious questions are open questions that basically they're inductive. They produce inductive reasoning, so they get people talking. They ask the what, the why, the how, the when, versus closed questions, which basically require reductive reasoning. And so you can answer a closed question with a yes or a no. So you want to ask questions that get people talking. Okay, so can you please help me understand why you're upset? Versus, why are you so upset? Oh, well, that's judgment. That's judgment. But are you upset? Yes, that's a closed question. So we want to ask open questions that promote conversation. The other thing is curious questions are not judgmental. And sometimes you can ask the same question, but the emphasis being placed on different words and the tone used will turn that question from an open, curious question to an open, judgmental question. So we have to be really careful that we're posing questions in such a way that the person receiving that does not feel judged. Thirdly, I talked about this just a second ago, that the person asking the curious questions, you have no idea what the answer is going to be. So there's no preconceived notions about the answers. And just, again, the posture that you take is a sincere desire to learn. So examples, what can I do differently to support you? What was it like for you when you were my age? Those are all examples of curious questions. This is, again, a really big deal for parents, learning how to ask curious questions to our kids. Kids are curious, but we need to be curious. And I think when our kids really feel interest and no judgment from us, it helps them to feel like they can engage in a conversation with us, which is important in resolving conflicts. So let's go. I want you to go back to that conflict that you wrote down, and maybe later afterwards, write down some curious open questions that you could use to open the channels of communication and to increase understanding between the parties. Now, I think that the important thing about developing your curious skills is that it can help you to identify the values, the interests that are underlying, those positions that are underlying your conflicts. And it can help you to engage in productive conversations and to find possible solutions to those issues that you're dealing with. Okay, did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay. Oh, and I think the other thing too is, apply those curious skills to yourself. Okay. Apply those curious skills to yourself so that you can start having a clear understanding of, what are some of your values and what are some of your trigger points. I think that's important going into a conflict, is knowing yourself and knowing the things that set you off before you're in a conflict, because then you can kind of head off conflict at the pass if you know that ahead of time, and curiosity can help you to discover that. Okay, so we got about 5 minutes. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is, as a tool of conflict management, is minding your conflict style. And each person has a default style that they use when they're dealing with conflict. And so I came up with these mottos to reflect the style. And so I'm going to read them off to you. And, you determine which one you identify most with. The first one is my way or the highway. So that's somebody who is a competitor, and basically it's command and control, like you're going to do it my way. Another is, go ahead, is problem. What problem? That's for the avoiders among us who are just like, oh, everything's great. There's no problem. The third one is I'll meet you halfway. And so this motto is for the people who default to compromising. That's kind of their default mode. The fourth one is whatever you think is best, honey. Those are the accommodators who basically are going to bend themselves into a pretzel to meet, you just do it, make the other person happy. And then the fifth one is let's work on this together. So that motto corresponds with collaboration. And the thing about these different conflict styles is that there's not one that's worse or better than the other. The real issue is that they're appropriate in different situations. And if you look at this graph, it's when you are determining what's appropriate, you want to consider the importance of a goal, which is on the vertical axis, versus the importance or the value of the relationship. And so the problem becomes when we have a default and we use it in every situation. Like as an example, problem, what problem? Basically what that's saying is that the outcome and the relationship is not, it's appropriate to use avoidance when the outcome of a situation and the relationship doesn't matter to you. But in a family, you can see how that could be problematic. If you just kind of always avoid, that's communicating something to your family. Mm-hmm. At the same time, my way or the highway, when kids are younger and you're trying to teach obedience and, they can't really even necessarily engage in conversation, that's probably a more appropriate way to deal with conflicts, but if you're dealing with a teenager and, you don't want to destroy the relationship, that's probably not the way to go every time you have a conflict. So, right. So these are just examples. What I think would be great for you guys to do later on is to think about which one of these models it resonates most with you, and ask yourself which one you default to, and then later ask your family members what they would say. Yeah. And I'm sure that will, produce a lively discussion.
Right. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Wow.
Hey guys, we had some technical issues. Can you guys do that class over again? So what did you say?
Nobody heard the class. So.
Yeah. Can you go over that, please? No, that was really truly awesome. And I tell you what, it was just great sitting at your feet. It was also very awesome that there's some Jennifer-isms that was there that we just cracking up.
See what you ought to do.
You see what you
I was like,
cracked up laughing.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Anyway, but really, really, really fantastic. So before we go into the question and answer period, Melanie's got, we got a couple of questions. And then I wanted to ask this. Is there anything that you guys would like to add or round out or what have you? It was fantastic by itself, but is there something as you were listening to it to say, hey, here's something that we would like to embellish or what have you?
Well, honestly, every time we do this class, I'm a student sitting at my wife's feet, listening to her teach this. And every time I'm out with my notepad taking notes. I'm literally sitting here thinking about a recent conflict, thinking about how I handled it, and trying to figure out how I'm going to take this class into my real life and apply it. So honestly, as I was sitting here with all of us, I was sitting here in many regards as a reflective student and wanting to take this and apply it to some things that are going on in my life right now. So yeah, that's really what I have to add. It's great to be able to go over this multiple times, honestly, because that's sometimes what it takes to let it sink in and learn.
Mhm.
So
I think for me, it's just the necessity to really practice these principles, because even knowing all of this that I know, so often I can just fall back into like just default modes of communicating that are dysfunctional. And so it does take focus, it takes practice to really put these skills into practice, and to kind of, you're developing a new way of navigating your conflicts. It's not just because you know it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do it. So the importance of applying these principles over time so that you develop new behaviors is, I've personally experienced that is really important.
Well, we're honored that you accepted the invitation to help us out, and we're honored to be friends with you guys, if you guys still consider us friends.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. All right. I was waiting for an answer.
He's so insecure. Needs to be built up.
No, but really, thank you so much, and so much to learn from you guys, and we look forward to that. I know Melanie's got a question, and then we'll use the next few moments here for us to, direct the questions at James and Jen.
In the video or the class that you had done for the other church, you had mentioned some worksheets and stuff, and we had to kind of cut that section of the video out because it was the question and answer. Can you speak to that a little bit, Jen? Because we're going to be offering them those documents that you had sent me, but can you just speak to it and frame it a little bit for everybody?
Yeah, so these are just articles that are written that help us to understand what's happening in conflict. Like, because a lot of times people find themselves in the midst of a conflict, and the goal is just to get out as quickly as possible. Like, I just want this to end, but the quality of how you're navigating is not really there. So I think a couple of the articles that I gave you just, again, give you frameworks. They break down kind of the drivers in conflict, and so that it was just helpful tools that I thought, well, these are good to refer back to. And then there's I sent a list of, I think, 32 questions that are open-ended questions, because that's the thing too, is, well, that sounds great in theory, but what questions do I ask? It's kind of like when you're trying to teach somebody how to praise God, and then they're like, well, what do I say? And well, let's look at examples of, so these are just examples of open questions that you can pose. You can kind of change the questions that, morph it to your specific issue. But I think it's a tool to help you to learn how to ask open questions that are non-judgmental, that'll get the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just for everybody who's on today, we're going to be providing the video and the tools and the worksheets that Jen gave us on our member portal. And for other churches that are joining, we'll send those to your church leaders, and they can then provide whatever platform they want to use. They can provide that for you. So thanks so much, you guys. While people are thinking about questions, Tony and I kind of jotted down a couple of questions, so we'll fire those off as we wait for other people to ask questions. One of the questions that came up for me was, do you have a tool that's helpful to go from the heat of an argument to curiosity? Because that's a jump, right? Your emotions are engaged, you're angry, your position is set. What's a helpful tool to go from that mode to curiosity?
That's a good question. So I think if you're in that mode, sometimes just taking a step back, because if you're in the heat of a conflict, like the fight or flight response has taken over, and that's part of your sympathetic nervous system comes in, and it's preparing you to fight off a bear. So it starts shutting down blood to the parts of the body that don't need it. And unfortunately, those parts are the parts that we need to navigate a conflict. Our executive functions, thinking part of our brain. That's what we need in the conflict, but that's the part that's shut down. So even in that conflict, stepping out of the conflict for a moment, breathing, what that does is it helps to roll back that physiological response that's happening, so that the adrenaline and the cortisol that's flooding your brain can dissipate, and then you can start to re-engage your thinking brain and get back to asking those curious questions. So just, I think sometimes having the discipline to just go, you know what, right now, I need a minute. I need a minute to compose myself, to calm down, so that I can actually engage in this conversation more productively. So that's in the midst of it. I think there's work that can be done before you engage in a conflict that will help, sometimes will help that fight or flight response not to take hold. And that is really understand, like, especially because in families you have kind of recurring conflicts that come up over and over and over again. So it's not something that you're broadsided by. It's like, okay, we're talking about this again. And so doing a lot of pre-work, like understanding, what are my values? Because you have in a family, each person has a set of values. And I think a lot of times we can make assumptions as parents that our values are the family values. And so really having a clear understanding, doing the work up front to understand, well, what are my values? What are my spouse's values? What are my kids' values? And then do those all translate into kind of the family values? So doing that work up front will help you to know, with respect to a given conflict, well, what values or interests are getting pricked here? Why am I even getting upset? Why do we have these conflicts again and again and again? Is doing the work to understand the dynamics of the interests and the values that are being, kind of pricked. Then you can start going, okay, so what are some ways that we can address, these value issues or these interest issues before the conflict even resides? Mm-hmm. So that's work that can be done. It's preemptive work that I think if people engage in that, what you'll find is those conflicts will go away.
That's awesome.
Great.
And as a non-expert, noticing my breath is something that I've learned to do. If my breath is really restricted and tight, and my heart rate's going up, and the back of my neck starts to feel a little bit warm, I know that I've learned that really breathing can help me. If you get into a conflict, a lot of times you'll be like, well, your body is basically trying to make you do what you need to do to calm yourself down. But if you do it more intentionally, at least when I do it more intentionally, I can lower just the things that are going on in my body to a more calm level. Sometimes it might be awkward to take a gigantic breath right in the middle of a conflict. Somebody's talking to you and you're like, right? So you might need to step away to do that. Maybe like excuse yourself to the bathroom or just say, can I have a minute? And take some deep breaths. That helps me. So,
and I think one more thing is that whole aspect, curiosity can be applied internally and externally. So I think for that internal exploration, why am I feeling threatened? This person is taking this position, but there's something that's under threat. There's something that I feel like I need to protect, where you do the personal exploration. And a lot of times that's hard for us. I think more so for men, a lot of times just being in touch with, what am I feeling? It's not exclusive to men, but I do think that is a challenge, is really being in touch with, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Especially in the moment. But that is a way also in that to start looking at the feelings of why you're being threatened, and not looking outward. Because what we do is we turn those feelings outward towards the other person, and they become the enemy. And then we're engaging in this fight against that person who's perceived as the enemy, but we're not really dealing with, well, why am I feeling the way that I am? What's feeling threatened? So if you can tap in the conflict to what am I feeling and why am I feeling threatened, that can help you too. So
Excellent. I think it's one of the highly underrated value in conflict and resolving it is the idea of taking, hey, can we pause here for a couple of minutes? And I think there are times, even in my growing up and journey, I used to think, am I copping out? Don't I have the humility to deal with this head on? Why do I need to take a break? And at times I thought that was a negative thing. Well, that's one of the greatest tools Melanie and I use when she's always wrong in our conflicts, right? No, on a serious note, it's like, honey, can we talk about this in an hour right now? I'm feeling this is not a productive conversation, but I've got to come back in an hour or however length of time. Or how did we get here? Like, how did we get here? Can I call a mea culpa and can we start over? Really, really awesome. By the way, I just had to say this inside. This fight or flight thing, when you feel you're fighting off a bear, that's because you're a Bruin and that Trojan has got to be fighting off that bear. Oh, anyways, that's a school that they went to, guys. Don't worry about it.
And Greg Taylor said, or we can all just buy funnel.
That's right. Awesome.
There's always one. You guys in the class you did before, somebody said, or I'll just buy funnel cake. There's always one person with that suggestion.
So we've got one more question. And then whoever, if you want to type it in, a question, that'll be awesome. But really, I mean, the comments here are just overwhelmingly grateful and helpful that what you guys have shared, by the way.
I don't know if you guys can read the comments,
but it's really, really fantastic. So,
another question that we came up with is, how does trust factor in to your conflict?
Well, that's a whole nother class, but I think
honey, it worked. We got them to commit to another class. That's awesome. Yes.
But I think, I don't remember what book it is. There was this concept of like the love bank, and if you make deposits in the love bank.
His needs, her needs. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So if there's deposits in the love bank, then when there's infractions, there's still a balance left. And so I think that's huge, is building up enough deposits in the love bank that when there are, when you have conflict, you're not dealing with a negative balance, because there's this thing called negative attribution error, which when we have negative experiences with a number of them, we start attributing the conflict to them, like some malicious character that they have, evil intent. But if you have like good experiences with a person and then you have a conflict, then a lot of times you'll attribute that to the circumstances, but it's not attributed to the person's character. And I think a lot of that is connected with what is the general experience that I'm having with this person. So if all of your conflicts result in escalations and bad feelings, or you're a competitor in terms of your conflict style, so your goal is to win, that win-lose dynamic, the winner feels great, but the person who is lost and given up everything doesn't walk away from that conflict. So depending upon your style, you might, engender feelings with the other person that is always negative. So you have to kind of address, like, what is the normative outcome, not normative, but what is the what's the word I'm looking for? The general outcome of my conflicts with this person. Do we leave feel like we brush it over, like, okay, we're going to move on, but really the feelings that we have are bad. That's going to erode the trust that you have in your relationship with that person. So,
also about trust, sometimes there's kind of like degrees of trust as well, so in certain circumstances, you might feel very comfortable with the situation and not feel like, trust is a problem, but you might delve into very sensitive topics that you've had specific issues with a person on, or with, a situation, and that when you go into that area, the red flags start going up. And so I think being aware of the fact that trust is not a yes or no or black or white issue. Sometimes there's kind of gradations to trust that you have to be sensitive to.
That's awesome. And somebody said here, it seems that practicing the approach takes vulnerability. Practicing, is that it? Yeah. Can you speak to that?
So I think that was what I was referencing when I talked about humble inquiry, which is something that we, at least in American culture, I don't know about Canadians, but we're not good at, because what often happens is you have like these power scales in a relationship. And so because we're so used to telling and being the authority, we're kind of in the position of power, so to speak. And so if I have to, I have to recognize that there is information that you have that is pertinent to our relationship moving forward, I've got to humble myself to ask that information of you. And so if you think about just social systems, that's why it's really acceptable for kids to be curious, to ask questions. We expect that, right? Because they're kind of on the power scale, they're at the bottom of the power scale. And so we expect them not to know. So they ask questions. But you take like a CEO or somebody like that who's supposed to know, if they present themselves as not knowing, that is viewed socially as unacceptable. And so part of it is really breaking free of that social construct where we feel like we have to know, and just saying, you know what, I don't know, and it's okay not to know. You have information that I need. You have, the answers. This relationship is based on both of us contributing. And especially for our kids, they need to feel like they're important to that dynamic as well. So I do think it takes, it's a specific choice to humble myself and to just go, I don't know this. I might be an expert in this area, but that doesn't translate to every area of my life. There are things that I don't know, and that's okay. And I need you to help fill in those gaps. So,
yeah. So here's another comment. Maybe you can speak to this. By the way, continual effusive notes about how people are grateful for this. We have not talked about personal biases, and each individual is growing up in a family dynamic that determine the outcome of the conflict. Can you speak to that, please? Is that another class as well?
It is, but
so far we have two more classes.
Two more.
That
Okay, all right,
teaching.
Guys, you better cancel all your other speaking engagements.
So there's this thing called the ladder of inference. Basically, it's we have to assimilate a lot of information to make decisions, right? And so a lot of this is done in split seconds. We're not even conscious that it's happening. But there's this whole backdrop that influences the data pool of information that we consider, and that is the basis for our beliefs and decisions and all that stuff. And so, and what affects that is, national origin, sex, age, race. There's so many things that play into how we view the world, our worldview, how we navigate conflict. All of those things come into play. And so I think, and it affects the biases that we have, like even in the United States, if you grew up in the West or the East or the North or the South, there are completely different regional points of view on any given number of matters. So I think kind of taking those things into consideration will help you to understand why the person that you're having a conflict with, their vantage point. And it helps you to have grace about your own, the fact that there's not necessarily one right way to look at things. There are a number of viewpoints that you can have, but really understanding who that person is, where they come from, helps you to have grace in those areas. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
but.
and I think one way this applies to something I'm more familiar with is in theological reflection. When now in seminary, you're taught to start by understanding your own theological orientation. Like where have you come from in the world? Because it so deeply impacts the way you read scripture, even, the way that you hear a verse, the way that you think about the cultural aspects of what's going on in the Bible. And so now frequently when you're doing biblical exegesis and you're taught that in seminary, you're taught to have some serious self-reflection so that you understand the color of the glasses that you're looking through into the reading of the scripture. That a lot of times we're taught to scientifically kind of dissect something with pure objectivity. That's a very Western way to look at life. But the truth is that's never really totally true, because we have a perspective. And so anyway.
Awesome. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, and do you think some of it is to, you talked about the goals and the relationship, because in a marriage and a family dynamic, I would think that your relationship is high on the, the value. And so if that's the case, if the relationship is important, then you're going to be willing to do the work, right, that it takes to understand each other and to understand the background. You're going to be willing to do the curious work because ultimately you want the relationship and you want it to be an effective relationship. Correct?
I think I like what you're saying. If that's the most important relationship, then you should be willing to do the work. That is true in an ideal sense, but that's not always reality, Yeah. It really isn't. I mean, there's a lot of people who are not willing to do the work. And, you in many respects are going to reap what you sow in that regard. But I think just even if you can understand like that conflict is a normal part of life, it really is. The measure of your relationship should not be measured in whether or not conflict is present, because it is present. It's always going to be present. But the measure of your relationship is how you navigate that conflict. So that really needs to be the focus, is not if it's present, but how it's navigated. Because if you're really truly engaging with a person, you got two sinners under one roof, sleeping in the same bed, sharing life, there's going to be conflict. There is. And there's so many scriptures where Jesus addresses conflict because he knew it was going to be there. Matthew 18, there's so many things where he's like, don't run from this, engage it, and all the calls, the Pauline calls to unity and do everything, to work out. I mean, God knew there would be conflict. And so he even biblically gives us so many tools about how to engage it and how to resolve it.
Yeah. And I think on that note too, if you know your conflict style, it's going to help dramatically. If you're not aware of your conflict style, then you're just going to immerse yourself in those conflicts and thoughtlessly, you might be a competitor and you might be married to an accommodator or somebody, so if you're just mindlessly entering into those conflicts, even though your greatest interest is the value still high in terms of the relationship, you might be doing some unintentional damage by not being self-aware. So
yeah,
great.
Awesome.
Wow, that's
really
awesome.
We're going to ask you guys, is this okay for us to have this as part of our library on our website so that other disciples can have access to this?
Sure.
That's awesome.
Wow.
So we're gonna wrap this up here in a few minutes. It says the measure of your relationship should be how you navigate it. Very, very well said. That was a comment that was made. Guys, it's just been really, really fantastic here. this idea. And I wanted to emphasize, because it was an experience that I have found helpful for me in my own journey and in my own life, but also in helping others. And that is, Jennifer, you mentioned something that was very profound with me right now, and that is, whenever you're trying to be helpful in a conflict, be it in your own personal conflict or if you're helping others with conflict, is preparing them. And in other words, having a surprise talk about a conflict is generally not very helpful, right? And so this idea is, hey, tomorrow, guys, we're going to not just go have lunch, but tomorrow I just want you to know that, hey, here's something that has come up. Can we talk about this, so that there's preparation? Is it the thing that you talk about? You know, it's maybe we can navigate it right there and then, but there are times that it's incredibly helpful to be prepared in our minds for a talk that is of high value, right? Especially as those relationships, you know, as the more high valued that it is, and the more hurtful ultimately that it could be, cannot be overstated. It is just really, really important, especially the older that someone is, the more quote unquote prominent someone is in terms of responsibility. These kinds of things are just really, really helpful. And honestly, it's bottom line just respectful that this is what's going to happen in that sense. Appreciate that so much. You know, in our conflicts, it's I love what you said there as well. This is not if it's going to happen, and probably if it's not happening, it's probably because there are some things that we're either denying or we don't have close of a relationship enough. Right. And so that's really, really, really important. Profound stuff. I love when people who are educated are and share their expertise. Is incredibly helpful. And I really, really appreciate the spirit with which you guys helped us this morning. And I love that you guys are not only teaching this stuff, but you really, really live out this stuff.
Yeah, and we'll probably here in Ottawa, we'll be talking and responding to this class for weeks to come. But just really grateful for the lesson, grateful that I came upon it. I stumbled upon it. It's awesome. And just, again, grateful for your time that you've put in, and really just look forward to doing some more things together. Again, so many people are super thankful and grateful, but we know everyone is busy on a Saturday and don't want to take more of their time. And
this will be spreading, and so that you know, there's a lot of people who are going to be watching this and be responding to it, certainly in a great and fantastic way. We love you guys. We'll have
spread far and wide.
I'm still cheesed about the funnel cake though, because I can't eat it. So like that would not solve my problem.
One of my mottos about leadership, especially as I've grown older, it's not what you know, it's who you know. and for us here, we have reaped the benefits of that motto. It's not what Melly and I know, it's who we know in the Becknells in this case. And so thank you guys for being willing. Thank you that we made some deposits in our relationship, and we were drawing some of that here today, and we're very, very grateful. Thank you so much. I'll have a prayer, and